Hello, YouTube, and welcome to a VTube exclusive. We're going to start the music and get you guys started. So, we're going to be looking at the Scandinavian defense from the black side and white side. We're going to be going through a starter course on how to play the Scandinavian. So, this is going to be geared towards people who are, let's say, newer to the game and also intermediate. Maybe not so much advanced or expert, because advanced or expert, they probably know what to do already. The music might be a little bit too loud. Let me just turn that down real quick. I want it to be a nice backdrop, but not the main thing. So the Scandinavian, for those that don't know, is e4 and then d5. The queen's pawn, 2 squares. So this move immediately challenges the center square. The one drawback of it is that, and I'll turn this analysis bar off, is that white can take, and after takes, your queen gets out, which you develop a piece, but they're also able to develop a piece with tempo. Now, there are 3 main lines after knight to c3. The first one is queen a5, which is what I play. The second is queen d8, which is popular, but maybe not my top choice. And then queen d6 is the third most popular option in this position. Or if you want to do a Bota's Gambit, you can do another move. But for the purposes of this, I would look at queen a5 and queen d8. Queen d6, one of the benefits of queen d6 is that we're on this diagonal, okay? Now, a drawback of it is that they just get a good position. Now, if you might wonder, what I'd wonder if I was a beginner is, okay, after knight b5, what happens? But you can just go back to d8 and say you wasted time with your knight here, and the tempos kind of even out. Or if you could play queen b6 too, and then like prepare to play this. Okay, so what are the ideas of the Scandinavian defense? Well, first off, we want queenside expansion, and we want to challenge the center. We're also going to be developing this side of the board first in a lot of cases. So let me just give you an example of a good target position. Let's say this, queen to a5, d4. You often play c6. c6 is a dual purpose move, so they're going to play bishop d2. Set up this x-ray on the queen, okay? So we give our queen a route to c7 to back up. We also stop d5. Well, we don't stop d5, but d5 is discouraged with this move. And what we want is a structure that kind of resembles a Caro-Kann with a pawn on c6 and e6 typically. Usually putting the knight on c6 is ill-advised if you're going to put the queen on a5, because it makes it harder for this queen to find a home. Here it has an easy retreat square, okay? So after, let's say, a move like knight f3, you play bishop to g4, and if bishop c4, you just play a move like knight to d7. I believe you can play knight to d7 in this position. Do note the tactic bishop takes f7. This does not work, because here there would be knight takes. And even if there was not knight takes, oftentimes queen takes can be a solution too, because this queen is also hanging at the end of the line, and you keep the option to castle this way. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that you have to start with this knight to d7. It's also very common to start with this knight to f6. Let's say we get a position like this. This would be very common. And let's say a move like rook e1, e6. You do have to watch out for some sacks on e6 in some lines, though. That is one thing to be mindful of. And after a move like bishop d2, queen c7 is often the response. Okay, so this is a good target position. They could probably play d5 in this position anyway, but we're looking to castle either this way, or sometimes people play it where they castle the same way. It is very flexible, and you don't have to commit to one plan. You can kind of improvise on the spot depending on how the game goes. Okay, but with any opening series for beginners, you have to know what to do if they play weird moves. So e4, d5. If they push, this is no longer a Scandinavian. What this is a Caro-Kann, but black is up a turn. And in this scenario, if you just play c5 and proceed as normal. They could play, let's say, knight f3. You could play bishop f5. they could play c3, knight c3, d4, and we get basically an advanced Caro-Kann. Something like this could happen. I'm not saying this exact move order, but this is going to be like a position that happens. At this point, this is a little bit outside of the scope of this video, but the plan is you play e6, you protect the pawn, you put pressure on this pawn with your pieces, getting your knights either, sometimes you just go like this to target the d4 pawn. So that's the idea. After a move like e6, do note a move like bishop g5 is never good because of queen b6, attacking this pawn and putting pressure on the d4 square. And if we know our openings, which this is why knowing openings is important, is after e4, c6, d4, d5, let's say e5, c5, we get basically the same position that I just showed you, except black lost a turn because they played c6, c5. Now, if you want to play the Caro-Kann, you can't guarantee that they'll give you a Caro-Kann up a tempo, so you shouldn't play the Scandinavian. But these are good sister openings, as there's going to be a lot of crossover in ideas, okay? Now, what are the drawbacks of all the different moves? Okay, so after e4, d5, e takes d5, queen takes d5, knight to c3, queen to d8. The drawback of this move is very clear. We spent one turn to take the pawn back, and then we put our queen back, so it's like the position hasn't changed for us, and we lost a turn. And this can actually go wrong for you very quickly. Let's say they play a move like bishop to c4, and, I don't know, let's say, here if you play knight f6, they play not knight g2, sorry, knight to f3. After bishop to g4, we're already in hot water, because knight to e5 is a killer threat, attacking the bishop. And if you take what looks like a free queen, uh-oh, spaghetti-o, you just got checkmated. So this is something that you have to watch out for, which is why I kind of don't like this queen going back to d8. It is one of the principal reasons. Usually you have to play an approach like bishop f5 and e6 instead to avoid these tactics. So queen to d8, the benefit is your queen is not in danger, and they can't target you with moves like bishop to e2. So that is one benefit of playing queen to d8, but the massive drawback is you're just losing an entire turn with the queen. So I wouldn't recommend this, especially at a beginner level. If you're in intermediate, you can try this out, and if you like it more than the positions you get after queen a5, then that's also completely acceptable. It is a okay alternative. Just don't fall for like early bishop g4, knight e5 tricks. And after bishop g4, knight to e5, you don't have to lose immediately. You could play this move bishop e6, but then you get this very ugly position. And actually, you know, this would be losing if queen h5 was available. Because let's say this knight wasn't here. Let me just illustrate that. If this knight wasn't here, then g6 would be forced, and it's very bad because after takes, they take the rook, and they're up a clean piece. Okay. So queen to d8 is your other option. There is also one more option that I neglected to mention, which is the knight f6 Scandinavian. The knight f6 Scandinavian is you neglect taking back, and you develop this knight, preparing to capture with the knight instead. And this is okay, because after the move c4, after c6, there's already tremendous compensation for the loss of the pawn. You have two pieces out, they have none, and you'll have a very easy piece development. So this is an option. E6, the Icelandic palm gambit, I would not say is as good, but if you want to add this weapon to your toolbox, you can definitely look into it. I cannot really speak on it because I don't play this e6. I have played the c6 move. It is nice. But I don't, unless you're prepared to play a gambit style, I would not recommend doing this. Now, white should not play c4 technically. I think Danya's recommendation here is this move bishop to b5, just to put something in front of this pawn, making it harder to win from the white side. And we're going to be focusing on the black side first. Okay. So that's, oh, there's one more weird thing they can do. After d5, they can play the move knight f3 instead. Now here there is two options you have, okay? Now what I like to do, especially in blitz games, because I don't like having to remember theory moves to evade getting trapped, is this move bishop to g4. And after bishop to g4, they basically have to take, and after we get a position, let's say like this, we just transpose into a normal Scandinavian line. But if you want to, there is nothing wrong with taking this pawn. It is absolutely acceptable. They don't play knight e5 typically. This looks very aggressive, but it's a little bit tenacious. I'd say they usually go knight to g5. And sometimes they play this move after, let's say, knight f6, bishop to c4. They'll play, let's say... I'm trying to set up the trap. I don't remember it off the top of my head. I don't really play this. Let me think here. Let's say... Oh, no, it's not bishop c4. Let's say this. We play bishop f5, trying to defend the pawn one more time. They could play queen e2 to pick it off, I believe. That is one option, to try to pick it off. Or they could play this much more ambitious move, bishop to c4. And, yeah, I mean, it's a tricky position. You have to defend this pawn, of course. So let's say this move. And it's an interesting, messy position. Me personally, I don't like being under pressure like this. I think white here's misplayed it. I'm not exactly sure what the main line is. It's bishop to g4 here, apparently. And bishop e2, and if takes, queen e2. We're losing this pawn, basically. So just don't expect to hold on to the pawn. It's up to you, though, like, if you want to take. But what my personal recommendation is, if you don't want to learn theory, for that particular line, just play bishop g4, and it'll transpose. And if they don't take the pawn, let's say they play h3, after takes, knight f6, white did something horribly wrong. Except we don't play knight f6 here, we would play c6 first. And then knight f6. Because we don't want to hang in this pawn. So white should not go for a line like this. Okay. So what are some of the middle game plans now? Now that we've covered what our openings usually going to look like and some of the variations, we're going to look for our plans. So after d5 takes, knight c3, queen a5, knight f6, knight f3, knight f6, d4. They can also play d3. Either way, they're going to put a bishop on e2. This is more ambitious. Bishop to c4 against queen a5 is less effective than bishop to e2. Bishop e2 is better because it just protects this knight, so this pin is never annoying. So c6 after bishop d2. Oh, I need to illustrate an important point too. So there is going to be this common idea at a beginner level of, let's say, after a move like, how do I set this up? Bishop e2, let's say bishop g4. There is this common blind spot where people will put this bishop on g5. And in these lines, this does not work because after takes, they can try to take Desperado. But if they take the bishop, then our queen from a5 wins this piece, which then we should win the game from there. And if they take, we take here with tempo. They'll take here. We have to take with the g-pawn, but we're also up a piece in this line, so we're going to have a very comfortable advantage here. So always watch out for this possibility of putting a bishop on g4 and taking on f3 at the right moment. Now this is maybe a little bit less common once you're like 1800 plus, but this is blundered so often, even up to 1800, I'd say. So keep an eye out on that if you play the queen a5 Scandinavian. But after, let's say, bishop to d2, queen c7, bishop e2, bishop to g4, castles. Let's say the move knight bd7. If they are castled kingside and they chase you away with h3, there is this idea of the fishing pole trap with h5. And white can actually lose very quickly here. if they take here and then play knight e5, which is very natural, they should be dead loss, because after these exchanges, the square is impossible to defend. Let's say they defend it, then you circle your queen to h5, and your rook combines nicely, and they cannot stop. They can stop queen h2 being mate, but they can't stop both being mate. And this will win you many games if you get this trap. There's also another variation of this trap. Let me just set it up real quick. So let's say after knight to f6, they play bishop e2, they don't commit their pawn. You play bishop g4 here, castles, and let's say c6, h5, h3, h5 also works here. So there's going to be some prerequisites for this fishing pole trap working. Okay. Why does it work with our queen on a5 here? It is because they have not pushed the d-pawn, okay? The d-pawn, if it was on d3 or d4, h5 would be a game-losing blunder, because they would be able to secure an extra piece. But here, after takes, if they move the knight, let's say anywhere, then they're going to be met with queen h5, and this is going to be checkmate, basically. I believe so. There might... Yeah, I don't see a way to avoid it. Let me see here. I don't want to mislead anybody. I think this is just mate. No, okay. f4, you can hold on, apparently. But the problem with f4 is... like, we're weakening your position, and after e6 and, like, bishop f5, we're completely lost. Maybe there was a better way to play after this instead of queen h5? Let's see here. Yeah, just queen e5. Queen e5, of course. Attacking the knight and the square. Here, they can get out of it, technically, if they play rook e1 and just get back the knight. That is the best approach, but people at the lower rating don't often find this resource. But yeah, if they play something like this, queen to e5 just wins the game on the spot. It's a fork of these two squares. So this is something to be aware of, too. We can go back to the other line, where we got it the other way. Let me see here. A lot of analysis, let me... Nope, that wasn't it. Yes. And done in this line, there's also an attempt that I believe happens. Let me see here. So after f4, there is this idea... Okay, yeah, here we go. Of queen to f7. Their only move is to play rook here. And after j3, they want to stop the mate, right? And let's say they block with the queen. We can get a lot of resignations this way. What we will do is we'll take the rook, which we're up material already. But if you want to prompt resignation, there's killer blows in this position of rook to h1. And after takes, you win the full queen. And they should resign. And if they don't resign, we're a couple moves from winning the game anyway. You'll castle, you'll play e6, bishop b5, and you'll quickly checkmate them. So this is also an idea that you have to keep in your back pocket to win a lot of the games. Okay. So that is one thing to do. Okay. And that's definitely a thing to note. So this is why I like the queen a5 one. There is one risk of playing queen a5, and there is one line that you have to kind of be aware of. So after queen a5, they can try this tricky gambit line with this move b4, sorry. And after queen takes b4, they oftentimes play, what's the move here? Yeah, knight b5. And after knight to b5, queen a5, bishop to c4. It is critical in this position you play the right thing. Let's say you play the wrong move. Let's say c6, which is very natural. Well, then there's this explosive move. I think it's queen h5. Yeah, queen h5. And you want to stop this, right? But if you stop this, let's say if you play a move like e6. Uh-oh. Knight to d6 comes. You stopped one trap, but you lost your queen. And I'm not sure. Bishop takes f7 might be even more accurate. But yeah. Yeah, bishop takes f7 first. And if you take, now queen h5 is devastating. Because if you play g6, knight d6. Yeah, this is the line I was remembering. I just got the move order wrong. And after takes, you lose the queen. So you have to be very careful of this trap. But this gambit is bad because if you know knight f6, then they no longer have queen h5, bishop takes f7. And what you will do is, I mean, they can play knight f3, play normal moves, but then they'll play this. The one downside is, if they play a move like, let's say, rook b1, this bishop is kind of tied down, or the queen is tied down to this pawn. And we're probably going to have to castle to the king side, which is the only sad thing about it. But it's a playable gambit. From the white side, if you want to learn this, I definitely think you could get a lot of people off guard, even if Ijin says, okay, black is better. Black is going to be better in any of these gambit lines, but it's definitely a possible route to go for sure. Okay. But yeah, so there's also going to be players who, let's say, don't challenge your queen at all. Do not move the queen until it's been kicked. So let's say they play knight f3, just play bishop g4. And after they play knight c3, you can play either rook queen d8 Scandinavian, rook queen a5-1, or rook queen d6. I'm a personal believer in queen a5, so I would recommend to all my subscribers to be playing the queen a5-1 all day long. And the great thing is, these ideas are just so thematic and common that you don't have to necessarily know specific theory. Okay. One other thing to point out for middle game plans is, let's just set up a position. Knight to f6. d4, knight to f6. Bishop d2, c6. Okay, if they play h3, if you do not have this knight develop to d7, it is risky to play bishop h5. In the Scandinavian, usually taking a bishop for a knight is discouraged if you're not damaging the pawn structure or anything. But here there is a pretty good justification. After g4, if they're uncastled, knight to e5 becomes pretty annoying. Targeting this bishop, this knight has great posts. One problem that this knight creates is, let me illustrate. Well, okay, there is also ideas of playing, let's say we pass the turn back. There's this idea of playing f4. f4 and f5, and if you ever play a move like h6, well, they'll wait for you to do this, and then you damage your pawn structure. This sometimes happens in your Bob Londons, too. So you have to be very mindful. So that's why at below, like, 2100, I'd say, like, just taking the knight in a situation where they play h3 before castling makes sense. And then just play knight d7, e6, long castles. So, yeah, I mean, this is, like, the typical plan. Also, if they castle, let's say they castle long, you can castle long, too. No worries about it. Or if you want something more combative, what we could do in a position like this is play e6. They could tuck their king away. Here, let's say they try to attack for king in the center, castles, and you get a combative game where we're going to be pressured on the king side, and here we're going to pressure them on the king side. Now, probably castling the same way is better objectively. Like, I'm guessing white's slightly better here, but it is a way to play. It's up to you. It's your level of risk, really. The Scandinavian is something you can play for a win, but also if you want to get a quieter game, you can. You just have to make sure that your queen doesn't get trapped. Also, if we go back to a line where we allow the knight to e5, let's say h3 happens, g4, here, here. A problem with playing the move knight c6 in these positions is, and this is why I think it's so good to put a pawn on c6 to give your queen that tuck-away square. Let's say if you go for a more aggressive development approach. After knight to c6, well, first off, they could damage your pawn structure, but also you have to be worried about moves like knight to c4, which make your queen feel very uncomfortable. And I want you to note that knight takes c6 is, like, equal-ish, but knight c4, and we're nearly winning on this spot. And I've blundered this a couple times against some very strong players, and they will punish you for it if you allow it. So, most of the time, play for the c6 knight bd7 approach. And, yeah, so I think the key takeaways from this is we're going to keep an eye out for h5 moves in the Scandinavian whenever there's a same-side castle in h3. That's called the fishing pole trap. We're not going to discriminate against the possibility of perhaps taking this knight with our bishop, like this. I've even seen strong players play something like this before, just forgetting about this. So always keep an eye on the g5 square while your queen is on a5, and if they blunder anything regarding it, make sure to take it. And then don't be afraid to play aggressively. Remember, you can castle either queenside or kingside in the Scandinavian. Do what makes you comfortable in any given position, and just try to play it objectively. Here, I want you to note, I just play natural moves. I didn't say, okay, after e4, d5, they're going to play knight f3 for certain. We're going to get very similar structures and positions, regardless of the order they play. For example, if they play knight to f3 first, don't worry about it. I mean, it's probably just going to transpose into whatever Scandinavian you play. If they play d3, good, it's passive. If they play d4, okay, it's committal. So you don't have to worry about anything. Now, Engine will say in any of these lines that white has a small plus, but from a practical perspective, the Scandinavian is still a really strong weapon. And, you know, Hikaru plays it, Gotham Chess plays it. There's a lot of people who play it. I started playing it, I think, on my own accord, basically. But this is going to be a great weapon to add to your arsenal. And whenever they decline, you get the bonus of learning some Caro-Kann theory, except it's an even better version of the Caro-Kann. So yeah, this is going to be this week's YouTube video. I hope that you guys enjoyed. This was the first time I did a video like this where I, you know, tried some impromptu coaching for a not live audience. I've done coaching before with students, but this has been a little bit more informal, I guess. I hope that you guys enjoyed this. Please let me know what your stories with the Scandinavian are, your best games, in the comments down below. And if you have any suggestions for how I should do these videos to make them more instructive or anything, please let me know in the comments down below, as I'd love to help you and be your favorite underrated chess coach. Anyway, till next time, this was Coach Nightlen, and I'm out. Peace.